The first reading contains a model for Christian living. I was back in Wales for my mother's funeral and exposed once again to the ambit of what had actually formed Welsh culture over 2 or 3 centuries. As you may know, in countries like Wales, they only have essentially the scriptures, and these passages, which gave a model for life in the culture of the chapels, was actually taken quite seriously. Hence, things like swearing, immodesty, and all this clutter, which by now has become a norm in our world, was not acceptable. It's something that one ought to examine one's conscience on. If we allow ourselves to be so much like the surrounding atmosphere, then one can ask, am I actually living out my faith? Am I recognizable? There's no need, for instance, for sins of the tongue, swearing in particular, to come out. There's no instinct which makes us swear. It's just imitating those around us. It's being conditioned by another norm. But I want to zoom into the gospel. In these last Sundays of the year, there is a crescendo of references to the crunch. We have already this sickle coming in, reaping the harvest. And we have the last word given to the Alpha and the Omega, not to those who make much noise in this world, and as it were, presume that by making much noise, they can push aside this question. Gather up the weeds, the darnel, first, and bind them in bundles. And we have this word, to burn. But gather the wheat into my barn. Even in church circles, this question of the crunch is much downplayed, is it not? Who will actually go into any detail with regard to this burning? It'll be duly clinicalized and made innocent and harmless, poeticized, and so on. It hasn't changed a bit. And it can't. It's of the order of metaphysical truth. We are not in control of what is in eternity. We think that by belittling it, poking fun at it even, we can cancel it. Well, 1 second after shedding our possibility of noise, our voice box and our body, then we're on the receiving end of time. We can make no noise against the fact, the one big fact that perhaps we never faced. This I was given at my ordination by the nuns of the Carmelite convent near where we live in Wales. And the Mother Superior pointed out, there you have time, and there you have the world. And ever since, each time I look at this, I think about that issue. Why? Because time, as we know it, at its intersection with eternity, in one last breath, ceases to be. Indeed, in the Purgatory manuscript, which years ago I translated over some months in France, this came through. The soul of the nun in Purgatory, who was wanting help from the other nun, was answering the other nun's questions. And this question came out, the question of time. And the answer is quite puzzling. It went in this vein. It's like another dimension that you cannot understand until you've got here. So we can't in any way dialogue in that field. I was listening to my brother when, just a few minutes after my mother had breathed her last, he phoned, because he'd phoned earlier that night to say that she was sleeping profoundly. And he described then what had happened. I share it with you because I was talking about it to the parish priest of Dulique, who also came to the funeral, and he said, yes, it happens quite a lot when there is this cross-section between time and eternity. I've heard it also from others. It's this. He was describing how, from sleeping profoundly and breathing in a certain way, through the normal ways, suddenly she started to breathe in a different way. Henceforth, only through the mouth, but very light breaths. He became alerted and phoned his wife, but she didn't have time to get there. Suddenly, she opened her eyes, and by the end of her life, she was nearly blind, which was a great suffering for her, who read so much and loved to play the piano. But he noticed that these eyes, because he was trying to make contact with her, were not looking at him. They seemed to be really seeing. And they were looking around the bedroom. I've heard that before, and the parish priest of Dulique said the same thing. It seems that at that point, the frontier between time and eternity is disappearing. And there is communication going on. She had often, I'm told, been telling my brother she wanted to go home to Idris, the husband. And could it be that at this point, dear departed souls or angels do somehow make themselves present? We don't quite know. But it seems that at that point, heaven and earth are just touching. And then he described how the breathing became frail and stopped. Oh. But then there was another breath. Oh. And I think one more, at the most two, and no more breaths. Now at that point, the common experience of all mankind was at that bedside. The grand journey over which no traveller returns. Going, it would seem, into some kind of tunnel, into a different region. Initially, seeing the body from outside the body, and then moving on. It's not in any way a cessation of being, even though before us at that point we have a different reality. There is an absence. But that is the beginning. They are moving on. And they're moving on to the great family of mankind, the majority, the reality, the dawn, Indeed, even in antiquity, there is that expression, ad maiores redivit. She went to the majority. The majority is on the other side. And I remember the prior at La Trappe saying, after we buried Frère Marie, and in the monastery we buried them without a coffin, remember, the body goes down as it is and covered in earth. He said this, Frère Marie est allé à la grande trappe. He's gone to the grand trappe. The great family is there. The community, remember, went on without a break since 1147 when it was founded, even though it moved from here to there. Therefore, a huge number of hidden saints waiting and saying, come, this is your family. This is reality. And as it happened, we buried Frère Marie next to his brother, who was a good layman who never married, who'd already a few weeks earlier been placed there in the same cemetery. And as I looked at these two exits and entries into eternity, I thought to myself, that is interesting. We heard from the prior how he entered in the time when there were no comforts. It was freezing cold, extremely austere. And therefore I thought to myself, all those years of utter silence and terrible penance are written on his copybook. And I thought about his good brother beside him. He surely made it, but I wonder whether that same total was there. And then I thought, all those in the rest of France dying on a daily basis. And by the way, in France, often they don't have a priest to bury them. Indeed, some bishops don't allow a priest to celebrate a funeral, because if they do, the time will go to the deceased. And so lay people do it, or deacons. All that in parentheses, to say that people are dying all the time and presume that it's all the same on the other side. And our funeral homilies and eulogies give that impression. Completely, completely false. When time is over, my friends, that's when our eyes see things as they are. And apparently, every act is seen again. Every forgotten act is watched as though on a video. Good and bad that we completely forgotten passes before our eyes. And that is reality. Judgment. This morning, as I came back from the parish, because I go to confession just before the 9 o'clock mass, and I go into the box then myself, as I usually do, I paused in the cemetery, the old monastic settlement there in Dulique, and I thought, here is time, forever and ever. Over each of these tombs, there's a history and a future, and the pendulum goes backwards and forwards all the time, saying one of two things: forever and ever and ever and ever, or never, 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 never. That, my friends, is reality. We are only passing. Beyond the veil, there is a place beyond geography, where pain is heard no more, where pain is all that can be heard forevermore, to be the echo of the last unvoiced call, no larynx made, where fade the very sounds that matter, for a while. For matter there is none, and where these lie, yond sleeps sweet bounds. There is a rest that is best taken now. O little field of stones, each silently awake upon strange rest, a story vast hangs on your chiseled words, and quietly a pendulum rocks onwards at the last. Amen for aye, amen, so shall it be. Amen for aye, amen, it shall not be.